Hello, Samuel Pepys here. You find me today at the Worcestershire County Museum here at Hartlebury Castle. Now, I'm famous for writing a diary. I only wrote the diary for 9 years, from 1660 until 1669, but probably the most famous pages of my diary are those I wrote in the early days of September 1666, the time of the Great Fire of London. Now, what I've got for you today are a few experiments to do with fire. You see, back in 1666, we didn't know what fire was. It was just something that existed. It was one of the four elements: earth, air, fire and water. And everything we could see in the known universe was made out of a combination of those four elements. Of course, now where are we now? 2020, good Lord already. Now in 2020, of course, you know about many, many more elements. And I'm going to talk about some of those now. So here we've got a candle burning, just a simple candle. Like I say, back in 1666, we'd have thought that fire was just existing. But now you know it's a process. It's a chemical reaction. It's something that's happening. Now, this candle here is a nice modern candle made out of something called paraffin wax. Now, back in 1666, that candle would have been made out of tallow, animal fat, and would be chemically quite complicated and very smelly and smoky. But a nice modern paraffin wax candle is quite simple. It's made out of two elements. It's made out of carbon and hydrogen. And I'm going to show you 2 or 3 experiments with that candle that shows you how the fire reacts and changes and joins together those elements. So the first thing I'm going to do is pop this jar over it. Now, the one thing this will tell us is all about the fire triangle. You see, the fire triangle, those are the 3 things that fire needs to exist. Firstly, you've got heat. You've got that initial spark. I used a lighter to light that candle, and obviously the Great Fire of London, that initial spark, that initial heat came from Thomas Farriner's bread oven, from his bakery in Pudding Lane. The other thing you need is fuel. The fuel in this case is that paraffin wax and the wick. Back during the Great Fire of London, obviously the fuel was the whole of London itself, all the buildings and everything that people kept in those buildings. And thirdly, you need oxygen. Oxygen that's in the air all around us. So that fire, that candle, will keep burning as long as the heat of the flame is there, as long as the fuel from the paraffin wax and the wick is there, and as long as you've got plenty of oxygen in the air all around us. So if I pop this jar over it, what I'm doing is limiting the amount of oxygen that flame has got. It'll only use about 25% of the oxygen, but when it's used that oxygen, the fire can no longer exist and it will go out. This is 2 experiments in one, really, because not only, in fact, if you see now, I think the candle's getting a bit dimmer already. Not only that, but can you see, you probably can't tell, but I'll show you later, that the inside of that jar is starting to mist up. And what that is water vapour. Water vapour. Remember I said you've got hydrogen in that paraffin wax. And what's happening is the hydrogen is combining with some of the oxygen, making something called H2O. And all H2O is the chemical name for something really simple. It's just water. Oh, there goes the candle. The candle's gone out, so we know that it's used up all the oxygen that it can. But if you look at the inside of the jar, if I rub my fingers down, it is just a little bit wet. And that's the hydrogen and the oxygen making water vapour. Now, if I relight the candle, I'll show you what's happening with the other element in this paraffin wax. Because what that is the carbon. Now, I've got a nice, clean, shiny spoon here. Now, if I hold this spoon over the flame, we know the spoon's not going to burn, it's not going to melt, it's nothing like hot enough. But I will show you what happens. If I hold that spoon over there, not for long, not for a few seconds. Remember I said the carbon was joining with the oxygen to make carbon dioxide? Well, if I hold it over there, it hasn't got time to do that, so the carbon just comes out and sticks to the bottom of the spoon. And the bottom of the spoon goes completely black. Now, that's the carbon that a few seconds ago was in that paraffin wax, but the fire has released that. Another word for that is soot. If any of you have got like an open fire or a wood burner, every now and then a chimney sweep needs to come round, and all the chimney sweep is doing is removing that soot from the chimney. And there it is, stuck on the bottom of the spoon. Now, one last experiment with this candle. Remember I said the fuel in London was not just the buildings, but it was everything that was in the buildings. Now, a lot of people, especially merchants and rich people, would have had all sorts of things down in their cellars, pitch and tar and things like that that burn. Another thing a lot of people would have been barrels of brandy. Now, the thing is with brandy, it's very strong, there's a lot of alcohol in it. and alcohol burns. So imagine the house is on fire and the floorboards are burning, and then those burning floorboards drop down into the cellar. And maybe they start burning around a barrel of brandy. And the brandy in that barrel starts to boil, starts to get hot, and the alcohol is released as a vapour. And then what happens is that alcohol catches fire. If I hold it in front of this black thing there, you might just be able to make out a pale blue flame. And that's the alcohol in the brandy burning off. So that's yet another fuel to help the Great Fire of London spread. Let me blow that out. Over here. There we go. Right, I'm back. Now another thing that helped fuel the fire was flour. Remember I said it started in Thomas Farriner's bread, in his bakery in Pudding Lane. Now obviously you make bread out of flour, out of wheat flour. Now flour burns, not so much like a bag of flour, but if you get a big cloud of flour, all those individual tiny little particles all burn at the same time. You get a sort of a mini explosion. I'm going to show you now. Now I'm not going to use wheat flour, I'm going to use custard powder. You see, the thing is with custard powder, it's made from corn flour, which burns even more easily. It's also, I'm going back, it's also got sugar in it, and sugar burns very well as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a little teaspoon or so of custard powder, and I'm going to pop it in that pot. Now attached to the pot there is this hose pipe. So if I blow down this hose pipe, you're going to get a big cloud of custard powder coming out. But we need something to ignite that custard powder. So I've got here a little blowtorch. Just turn it on. There we go. A bit noisy. So let's see what happens when I blow down this hose. Okay, you ready? 3, 2, 1. Look at that. So imagine you've got Thomas Farriner's bakery on fire, the floorboards are starting to burn, maybe starts to burn some of the shelves, and a big sack of flour falls off the top, hits the ground, bursts, and you get a big cloud of flour and you get a big fireball like that, and then the fire is really going. Now as the fire got bigger and bigger, it created something called a firestorm. And what that means is, much like this candle, it's sucking in cold air at the bottom, it's using the oxygen, and it's blowing the hot air out of the top. Now when you get a really big fire, like the Great Fire of London, you get a huge amount of hot air over the top of the city, and the cold air at the side is being sucked in, and it becomes so violent and the fire needs so much oxygen, you actually get a wind blowing in. It was almost strong enough to blow people into the fire. And you get a big circular motion like that. And when you get circular motion like that, every now and then it starts to spin, because things like to spin, don't they? Like water down the plug hole, or tornadoes, or hurricanes, and sometimes you get something called a fire tornado. And I'm going to show you one now. So here I've got a turntable, big heavy turntable. So if I spin that, any fire I make in here will start to spin. But just on its own it wouldn't really work. But if I put this pierced cylinder over the top of here, that column of air in there will start to spin and we'll get a fire tornado. Let's see what happens. Now I'm not going to use brandy because it doesn't burn bright enough, so I've got something here called lighter fuel, which burns nice and easily, and you get a nice bright flame. So what I'm going to do is I'll set fire to that, pop this on and give it a spin. Right, let's see what happens. And there you have a fire tornado. And can you hear it as well? Now that's just a fire a few centimetres across. Imagine a fire as big as this room, or as big as this building, or as big as London, and how loud and scary that must have been. But once the fuel's gone, the fire goes out. So that's all of my experiments for today, but hopefully we'll have a bit more of something else later. Okay, bye.